So, when we talk about massive government debt, your mind probably jumps straight to the United States, right? It's all over the news, endless fights about the debt ceiling, record breaking deficits. It's loud, it's messy, it's very public. But what if I told you that the real debt story, the one that could have even bigger consequences for the entire world, is happening somewhere else and almost in total silence? Well, that's the paradox we're going to unravel today. And yeah, on the surface, you couldn't paint a more different picture. The US is often cast as the reckless borrower, always spending more than it has. Meanwhile, China has this image as the world's careful, disciplined lender, the one holding trillions of dollars of other countries' debt. It's the classic story we've heard for years. One country spends, the other one saves. And, if you just glance at the official numbers, that story seems totally true. At the end of 2023, China's official government debt compared to the size of its economy was just over 56%. I mean, compared to the US at over 120%, or Japan, which is over 250%, this looks fantastic, super manageable, almost conservative. It's a nice, clean number. But then, bam, you see a headline like this, a claim that China's debt problem is actually 3 times the size of America's relative to its economy. And you just have to stop and think, wait a minute, that's a massive contradiction. One number says everything is totally fine, and the other is screaming about a crisis that's off the charts. So what's going on here? How can both of these things possibly be true at the same time? How can China be a model of fiscal responsibility and a ticking debt bomb? Well, the answer is hiding in plain sight, just beneath the surface of those official numbers. To solve this puzzle, we've got to look away from the central government in Beijing. The real story and the truly massive pile of debt isn't there. It's spread out across thousands of provinces, cities, and towns all over the country. This is where the quiet borrowing has been happening for decades. And this whole problem was basically created by design. It all kicked off back in 1994, when some reforms basically gave local governments all the spending responsibilities, but not enough of the tax money to pay for it. Then came the big one, the 2008 financial crisis. To keep the economy humming, Beijing told local governments to go out and borrow and build like crazy. For years, this whole system was propped up by a red-hot property market. See, they made their money by selling land. But when that market finally started to crack in 2021, their entire financial model just began to fall apart. And the results of all this? A number that is just mind-blowing. By the end of 2022, the estimated debt of China's local governments, including all their hidden borrowing, was around $12.6 trillion. That's about 76% of the country's entire economic output for a year. All of a sudden, that clean 56% official number we saw earlier, it looks like a tiny piece of a much, much bigger and messier picture. Okay, so how on earth did they pull this off? How did local governments borrow trillions of dollars without it ever showing up on the official government books? Well, they used a very clever and now pretty infamous little accounting trick. It's time to meet the LGFV, the Local Government Financing Vehicle. Okay, here's the secret sauce. An LGFV technically isn't a government body. It's a company. And that little distinction, it's everything. By setting up these shell companies, local officials found a perfect loophole to get around the strict borrowing limits that Beijing put in place. They could fund all their grand projects, new roads, shiny airports, massive bridges, without the debt ever officially touching the government's books. And this is how the magic trick works. It's a pretty simple 4-step dance. First, a city creates an LGFE. Then it shoves its most valuable asset, land, into this new company. The LGFE then walks that land over to a state-owned bank and says, hey, give us a giant loan. The money gets used to build all that infrastructure, and the debt, it just sits on the LGFE's books. It's this huge hidden liability that everyone knows the government will back up. But on paper, it's just corporate debt. All right, let's put this all together. Remember that nice, clean number we started with? The official government debt sitting all comfortable at 56% of GDP? This is the number that makes everything look okay. But the moment you pull back the curtain and add in all that hidden LGFV debt, boom. The International Monetary Fund calls this the augmented debt. The real number jumps to 117% of GDP. That's nearly double the official figure, and it puts China right up there in the same ballpark as the United States. And believe it or not, we're still not done. Because if you zoom out even further and you throw in all the debt from state-owned companies, private businesses, and regular households, you get to the big one. Total debt of over 300% of GDP. This is the number that sparks those shocking headlines. It's an economy that is just built on an absolutely incredible amount of borrowed money. So this begs a huge question, right? If they created literally trillions of dollars in debt, where did all that money go? I mean, why didn't it create this massive consumer boom like we've seen in other countries? This chart right here tells you almost everything you need to know. In the US, people buying stuff makes up 68% of the economy. In Europe, it's 53%. But in China, it's way down at 39%. Even with all that growth, Chinese families are famous for being incredible savers. They just don't consume as much, so that money wasn't going into shopping sprees. So think about it. If you're not spending your money, you're saving it. But where do you put it? Well, in China, the local stock market is notoriously volatile, kind of like a casino for small investors. And at the same time, you have these super strict rules that make it almost impossible to invest your money outside the country. So that really only left one place that seemed like a guaranteed win: property. And this leads to a number that is just staggering. About 70% of all the wealth of Chinese households is tied up in real estate. An apartment wasn't just a home. It was your retirement plan, your savings account, your kid's college fund, all rolled into one. And this is what created the biggest asset bubble in modern history, connecting the financial fate of hundreds of millions of people directly to the ups and downs of the property market. Okay, I know what you're thinking. If the debt is this insane and it's all propped up by a shaky property market, why hasn't the whole thing just collapsed? Why haven't we seen China's Lehman Brothers moment? Well, the answer is all about the unique top-down, state-controlled way their financial system works. Probably the best way I've heard it explained is with this analogy. China's financial system isn't like the wild, open ocean of Western markets. It's more like a tightly managed aquarium. The government controls everything: the water temperature, when feeding time is, and most importantly, they control who gets in and who gets out. This control is what prevents the kind of sudden, widespread panic that causes a classic financial meltdown. And this is the toolkit Beijing uses to keep the aquarium from cracking. The capital controls are like the glass walls. They stop money from flooding out of the country in a panic. The big banks are all state-owned, so Beijing can just order them to roll over bad loans instead of letting companies fail. And since most of the debt is owed to itself in its own currency, they don't have to worry about a foreign debt crisis. Plus, the state owns a ton of valuable stuff it can sell if it needs cash. And critically, they can make sure borrowing costs stay super, super low. And this isn't just theory, by the way. We are seeing them use these tools right now, in real time. Beijing is issuing special bonds to bail out the most indebted local governments. Down in Guizhou province, banks were told to just extend a massive loan to one of these LGFVs for another 20 years. That's literally kicking the can 2 decades down the road. And that same government has been selling off its shares in the famous liquor company Maotai just to raise cash. It's a constant juggling act to delay and manage the problem. So, this brings us to the big takeaway, the real question here. The risk in China isn't necessarily a sudden, fiery collapse like we saw in 2008. The government has too many tools for that. No, the real risk is something far quieter, but maybe even more damaging in the long run: a slow, grinding economic stagnation. And this right here is the absolute key difference to understand. The risk from US debt is like a financial heart attack. It's sudden, it's visible, and it's driven by a market panic. The risk from China's debt is more like a chronic economic illness. The debt is this huge, heavy weight on the whole economy, slowing down growth, crushing confidence, and wasting money for years, maybe even for decades. It's a problem that doesn't explode, it just slowly grinds everything to a halt. So there you have it. The paradox is solved. China's clean official debt number is really just an illusion of safety. The real debt is enormous. And while Beijing has the power to stop a sudden collapse, it doesn't have a magic wand to make all that debt just disappear. And as the world's second largest economy slowly grinds under this massive weight, the question for the rest of us isn't if we'll feel the effects, but how.